All right, welcome everybody. We are just letting people in from the waiting room now. We'll just give a second or so for people to get settled in from the waiting room. And as you're just coming in, please feel free to use the chat box and you can introduce yourself, say where you're located, and perhaps what interested you in today's event. Welcome again, everyone who is just joining. Please feel free to use the chat box if you haven't yet. You can introduce yourself, say what town you're from, what brought you to today's event. Okay, so before we get started, we have a few Zoom logistics. Today's event will run for about 1 hour and a half. We are recording today's event. We will send out the recording afterwards, so if you have to leave at any time, no worries. And please use the chat throughout the event to post any comments or questions or feedback. And again, feel free to introduce yourself there. I see some introductions are coming in now. Captions should be enabled for today's event. You can click on the CC Live Transcript button to enable Zoom captions if you'd like to view them. If you don't see that button, sometimes you have to click the 3 dots in the bottom right corner, and that will expand your options, and you should be able to find the captions button. A reminder that the captions are done by robots, so please excuse any errors with the transcription. And with that, I will pass it over to Al Mitty to introduce today's event. Go ahead, Al.
This is going more quickly than I thought. So thanks to everyone for joining this event tonight. What we're doing is trying to get a new chapter of World Beyond War started for this statewide chapter for this state of Illinois, and where I'm very appreciative of all of you for joining this meeting. Also want to say thanks to David Swanson for being here and agreeing to present some information. I think you'll find David's presentation educational, informative, and perhaps even comical. I don't know if that's the right word. And since Kathy Kelly's has joined us, I'm pleased and honored that Kathy is also here. Just as this group, we had a meeting on, I think it was January 30th, when Kathy Kelly presented a lot of information about her experiences with the war and peace and her life as an activist and the courageous efforts that she has made over a lifetime. And Kathy, being an Illinoisan, is I think we can count on her being very supportive of our efforts here to get a chapter started. We're going to have some kind of business items. We're going to go through a breakout session and talk about some things. We're hoping that all of you will participate in those breakout rooms and bring your talents and skills to this effort to abolish war and establish a just and sustainable peace. What I'm going to do now is introduce David Swanson. I don't know if he really needs an introduction, but nevertheless, I will. David Swanson is an author, activist, and journalist and radio host. He is co-founder and executive director of World Beyond War and campaign coordinator for rootsaction.org. His books, and I should have a bunch of it. I have most of his books. I should have been displaying them. His books include Leaving World War II Behind, 20 Dictators Currently Supported by the U.S., War is a Lie, and When the World Outlawed War. He's written a lot of books and he writes very quickly. He blogs at davidswanson.org and warisacrime.org. He hosts Talk World Radio. He is a Nobel Peace Prize nominee and was awarded the 2018 Peace Prize by the U.S. Peace Memorial Foundation. He holds a Master of Philosophy degree from the University of Virginia. And I mentioned, since we're in Illinois, I told David this, that the last time the Illinois basketball team played the University of Virginia Cavaliers, the Cavs beat the Illini 72 to 61, I think it was in November of 2022. The last thing, a couple of other things I would say about David. One is his hair is way too good. And if you can see why I say that, his humor is interesting, and he is extremely productive. I recall one not too long ago, I sent him an article, I believe from the New York Times, and said, you could probably put something out in response to this article. And within 4 hours or something like that, he had this well-written document, repudiation of the kind of pro-war article that was in the New York Times, and he's amazingly productive. So with that, I will turn it over to David.
Thank you very much, Al. Thank you all for being here and for including me. Thank you to Al for getting everybody active in Florida first, and now attempting to do the same thing back in the real world. And thank you to Greta Zaro for organizing the entire planet for World Beyond War. And thank you to Al for finding something in these coming remarks comical, or at least interesting. I have increasingly found that anything satirical, which is no doubt what's in here somewhere, is more offensive even than war to most people. So anyone who is less offended by satire than by war gives me hope. We very much need World Beyond War educational and activist events and campaigns in Illinois. We also need the people of Illinois as part of the global movement to end war. I say that having been in Chicago many times, and at least once to Carbondale. Interstate 64, which comes by my house, also cuts through Illinois. So with a few cups of coffee, I can be there. We started World Beyond War in 2014 to work with the thousands of existing peace groups, but to do three things a bit differently. One was to be global. Another is to go after the entire institution of war. And another is to use education and activism both and together. And I'll say a few words about each of these things. First, on being global. There is a great peace activist named Bill Astore who has an article this week in Tom Dispatch where he suggests that if we rid the world of nuclear weapons, he could like his country better. I also read yesterday a book by my old philosophy professor at UVA, Richard Rorty, probably the smartest person in many ways I've ever met, who simply obsesses over the need to view US history as a glass half full, even if it means believing in myths and ignoring ugly facts. Unless one does that, he writes, we cannot do the work of creating a better country. He never even entertains, long enough to reject it, the possibility of staring at all the facts head on and doing the work regardless. Is the question of whether a country has done more harm or more good even answerable? Nor does he ever even consider the possibility of identifying with the world or a locality or a state, more so than a nation. What I love most about online World Beyond War events is that people use the word we to mean we people of the earth. Now and again, you will still have someone, always it's someone from the United States, use we to mean a military, and always it's the US military. As in, for example, hey, I remember you from that jail cell where we were in for protesting the fact that we were bombing Afghanistan. This assertion would seem like a riddle to a Martian who might wonder how one can bomb Afghanistan from a jail cell and why one would have also protested one's own action. But it is understandable to everyone on Earth who all know that US citizens recount the Pentagon's crimes in the first person. No, I do not mind if you feel responsible for your tax dollars or for your so-called representative government. But if we don't start thinking as world citizens, I see no hope for the survival of the world. World Beyond War's book, A Global Security System, describes the structure and the culture of peace. That is to say, we need laws and institutions and policies that facilitate peace, and we need a culture that respects and celebrates peacemaking and nonviolent change-making. We also need structures and cultures of peace activism to get us to that world. We need our movement to be global in organization and decision-making in order to be strong and strategic enough to defeat the global and imperial business of war. We also need the culture of a global peace movement because people who want life on Earth to survive have more in common with people on the other side of the globe who agree with them than they do with the people running their own country. When a US peace activist identifies with the world, he or she gains billions of friends and allies and role models. It's not just presidents of distant countries proposing peace in Ukraine, it's fellow humans. But the biggest hurdle is humility. When anyone in the US proposes that the US government do better on nuclear weapons or environmental policies or any topic under the sun, it is almost guaranteed that they will ask the US government to lead the rest of the world in a better direction, even though much or even all of the rest of the world has already headed off in that direction. Second, on the entire institution of war, the problem is not just the worst atrocities of a war or the newest weapons of a war or the wars when a particular political party is on the throne in the White House. It's not just the wars a particular country is involved in or indirectly involved in or supplying the weapons for. The problem is the entire business of war, which risks nuclear apocalypse, which thus far kills far more through directing money away from useful programs than through violence, which is a leading destroyer of the environment, which is the excuse for government secrecy, which fuels bigotry and lawlessness, and which impedes global cooperation on non-optional crises. So we don't just oppose the weapons that don't kill well enough or insist on ending a bad war to be better prepared for a good one. We strive to educate and agitate the world out of the very idea of preparing for or using war and into viewing war as something as archaic as dueling. Third, on using education and activism, we do both and try to be doing both together as often as possible. We do online and real world events and courses and books and videos. We put up billboards and then do events at the billboards. We pass city resolutions and educate the cities in the process. We do conferences, demonstrations, protests, banner displays, blocking of trucks, and every other sort of nonviolent activism. We work on campaigns for divestments, such as for the city of Chicago to cease investing in weapons, on which we're working in a coalition. And with the lessons we've learned from many successful and unsuccessful divestment campaigns elsewhere. We plan local, real-world, and online educational events, lectures, debates, panels, teach-ins, courses, and rallies. We pass resolutions and ordinances for conversion from military spending, for ending wars, for banning drones, for establishing nuclear-free zones, for demilitarizing police, etc. We help with lobbying elected officials, generating handouts and graphics, reaching media outlets, and creating media. We also answer the same relentless questions transmitted through everyone's minds by the US media about a topic like Ukraine, and encourage you to tell others who might tell others who might tell others so that someday the questions might change. We do campaigns to close or to block the creation of military bases, as we're doing right now in Montenegro, and we work across borders to provide solidarity. In a small country like Montenegro, any sign of support from the United States is of vastly more value than you'd likely imagine. Activism that you can easily do may not move the US Congress, but may have a huge impact in a place whose fate is determined by US Congress members who could not find it on a map. In a place called Sinjevina, the US military is trying to create a new military training ground against the wishes of the people who live there and who have been risking their lives to prevent it. They would be super grateful, and it might even make the news in Montenegro if you were to go to WorldBeyondWar.org and click on the first big image at the top to get to WorldBeyondWar.org/Sieniewina and find the graphic to print out as a sign, hold it up, take a picture of yourself in an ordinary place or at an outdoor landmark, and email it to info@WorldBeyondWar.org. And one of you on this call is so fast that he's already done this. And I wonder if I can't share my screen for 1 second. Here's an example if you can see it. Hopefully you saw that. So if you don't mind, I'll say a few more words about Sieniewina. The flowers are in bloom in the mountain pastures. The US military is on its way to trample them and practice destroying things. What did these beautiful sheep herding families in this European mountain paradise do to the Pentagon? Not a damn thing. In fact, they followed all the proper rules. They spoke in public fora, educated their fellow citizens, produced scientific research, listened carefully to the most ludicrous contrary opinions, lobbied, campaigned, voted, and elected officials who promised not to destroy their mountain homes for the US military and a new NATO training ground, too large for the Montenegrin military to know what to do with. They lived within the rules-based order, and they've simply been lied to when not ignored. Not a single US media outlet has deigned to even mention their existence, even as they've risked their lives as human shields to protect their way of life and all the creatures of the mountain ecosystem. Now 500 US troops, according to the Montenegrin Ministry of so-called Defense, will be practicing organized murder and destruction from May 22nd to June 2nd, 2023, and the people plan to nonviolently resist and protest. No doubt the United States will involve some token troops from some NATO sidekicks and call it an international defense of democracy operation. But has anyone involved asked themselves what democracy is? If democracy is the right of the US military to destroy people's homes wherever it sees fit, as a reward for signing on to NATO, buying weapons, and swearing subservience, then those who scorn democracy can hardly be faulted, can they? We have also just released our annual update of what we call Mapping Militarism, a series of interactive maps that let you examine the shape of war and peace in the world. And that too is on the website. In conclusion, I have told you nothing and am probably incapable of telling you anything that isn't said better on the website at WorldBeyondWar.org. And if anyone can ask me a question today that hasn't already been answered better than I can answer it on our website, it will be an historic first. So I encourage spending some time reading the website. But there are some bits that are only for chapters. We can work with you to create a chapter webpage. We can work with you to create a chapter account in the online tool we use called Action Network so that you can create petitions, email actions, event registration pages, fundraisers, emails, etc. As a chapter, you get all the public resources plus some that nobody else gets, plus assistance from our staff, our board, and all of our other chapters and affiliates and friends and allies around the world who stand in solidarity with you as a global community for sanity and peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And I think many of the ideas you shared will be an inspiration for the chapter. We'll have the breakout rooms in a little bit and we can discuss some of those ideas. We do have some time for questions, so please put your questions for David in the chat and we'll take about 10 minutes for Q&A. I see one question from Al already. Al says, do you think the sane countries of the world can pressure the war-making countries to abolish war, and how do those countries get to have a stronger voice and more power?
Well, I do think there are relatively sane countries. I don't know if I would go so far as to say there was a sane country. I think when Dan Ellsberg quotes Friedrich Nietzsche that insanity is rare among individuals, but the norm among societies, I think that's pretty much right. And I think we may have to get rid of countries. But as long as we have countries, and as long as most of them are doing dramatically better on matters of war and militarism, we have an interest in democratizing the global institutions that are made up of countries. If we could democratize the United Nations, if we could democratize the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, you know, right now we're in this situation where the United States and all of its allies and sidekicks and weapons customers don't want the rule of law applied to them, don't want international democracy, but neither does Russia, neither does China. The nations of Latin America are trying to unite against US imperialism, but are they in the position to create global democracy and the rule of law? I don't know. Same with Africa. I think we have to encourage every good action wherever it comes from. And if the president of Brazil or China or anywhere else, or a group of 6 or 8 of them are willing to try to push for peace, we have to try to put our shoulder on the wheel with them and push as well. But you know, we're not gonna get where we need to in terms of global cooperation on the crises that are not self-created, on the crises that we have no choice about at this point, of disease and homelessness and poverty and climate collapse and ecosystemic collapse, if we just have a balance of power among nations. We have to have global cooperation, and that's a step beyond what, you know, anything that's brewing at the moment.
Yeah, a related question from Lois: how do we reorganize the United Nations to be more effective in promoting and maintaining peace? And this is something that is talked about in World Beyond War's book, where we lay out some specific suggestions in this regard.
Yep, we have another report I wrote a while back, sketching out a completely different UN, and we have a good section on this, as Greta said, in a global security system. But you know, you start with not giving the 5 worst offenders the power to veto anything. You take away, you know, you don't set up an institution to eliminate war and then give the 5 biggest weapons dealers and war makers veto power over everybody else. You know, it doesn't work. You democratize it. You give power to the General Assembly. You get rid of the veto, etc. But you also move the UN in the direction of understanding that its unarmed peacekeepers succeed better than its armed peacekeepers, and you don't. You know, our dream should not be a 1 million person UN military. You know, our dream should be no militaries on Earth.
And a follow-up question. Thank you, Lois. Who established the present policies in the UN?
Well, they had a conference in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. They had a big conference out in San Francisco. They created the thing, and the United States was willing to approve it and join it, unlike the League of Nations, precisely because it would be more equal than others. You know, in the League of Nations, it would have been, for better and worse, lots of pros and cons, but it would have been one country among others. And the United States government was not interested in that in the least. And the policy of 5 permanent members of the Security Council with special powers was there on day one.
We have a little bit more time for questions. Feel free to put more in the chat. I'll put my own question in, which is maybe David, you can speak a little bit about, I know it's a long story, but a little bit about the divestment campaign in Charlottesville and or the Demilitarize the Police campaign. Those I think are sort of two iconic campaigns that you did and helped lead. And I think they're very doable campaigns that could be replicated in Illinois.
Yeah, I mean, if you live in a smallish city or town or county, and you have relatively enlightened people and elected officials and some vestige of actual representation of public demands, it's not that hard to pass resolutions or ordinances on these matters. You know, there was no big organized opposition when we promoted in this city where I live in Virginia, demilitarization of police, or when we promoted the divestment from weapons and fossil fuels. And I think it's something that can be very easily done, can educate a great many people in the process, whether you succeed or fail, and maybe more of them the longer it takes you to succeed, because you can do public events and media and op-eds and press conferences and, you know, pack the city council meetings and line up speakers and present your case. And we got our city to divest from weapons dealers and big fossil fuel companies in one vote, in one resolution, and we focused on presenting the case that it was one inseparable issue, that the weapons dealers were major contributors to fossil fuel use, and the fossil fuel use was driven by and related to the use of the weapons and so forth, and we connected it to the massive weapons problem within the United States as well. So it's increasingly difficult to do divestment if you're up against a body that cares more about some law or regulation requiring the maximization of profit than it does about the public. So in fact, in Charlottesville, we got the city councilors who are elected by us to divest the general operating budget, but we could never get the retirement commission, which is elected by nobody, to divest the retirement money from weapons. They would do fossil fuels, but not weapons, because they liked weapons. Sometimes you take half a win and you educate a bunch of people and you get a headline and you move on to the next campaign. And the one we moved on to was demilitarizing police, get them to get rid of any war weapons and tanks and armored vehicles and mine resistant vehicles. We don't have mines around here, and stop taking war weapons from the federal government, and stop doing militarized training of police and so forth. This is something that is actually succeeding in a growing number of places, even as it's failing in many others. In Memphis, Tennessee, they just got the police to no longer have anything to do with traffic, which, common sense would suggest you don't need armed troops to deal with driving issues, but it's the absolute norm everywhere, as far as I know, except Memphis. Philadelphia, they no longer are going to take war weapons from the government as part of their legal settlement for the abuse they gave to protesters around George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. Lots of cities and counties and towns are having successes on demilitarizing police. Lots aren't. In Atlanta, they're trying to build the world's biggest ever police murder training ground. So, it depends. But these are issues that overlap a lot with the general production of war and war preparations, but interest other groups as well. And so you can build big coalitions. You know, we passed an ordinance here banning drones, and we had the hippies right next to the guys with the NRA hats because one group didn't want drones murdering people 10,000 miles away, and the other group didn't want drones spying in their windows, and they couldn't care less who they're murdering 10,000 miles away. But we were united around this resolution, and you know, and we didn't contaminate each other. We aren't worse people. You know, you build a coalition around the issue you're working on and get it done and move forward.
Wonderful. All right, we have a few minutes left. 2 more questions. One is from Kathy Kelly, World Beyond War's board president. Kathy says, David, can you comment on the usage of drones in war making and tell us about the allegation that drones were used to attack the Nord Stream pipeline?
Very briefly, since I just heard we had a couple minutes, but as you know, we aren't including information on what they call drone strikes, and I call drone murders, in the mapping militarism maps anymore, because the US government has stopped providing the data that it provided up until a couple years ago. And nobody else is doing the sort of reporting that a group in the UK was doing for many years. So there just isn't the sort of good data. There's here and there spotty reporting from the receiving end of the drone explosions where the missiles are hitting. But there's no, as far as I know, I would love somebody to fill me in. There's no good, solidly researched database of all of it. So there's not an easy way to make a good map, but it's ongoing. It's accepted as normal. It's accepted as legal. The laws against murder are just gone. It doesn't count as war, but it doesn't count as murder either. It's some murky area in between. You can end the war in Afghanistan and go ahead, keep blowing people up with missiles from drones. That doesn't count. It's very, very dangerous. It's destroyed the world's laws on murder. It also very likely has destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline. You know, we had a report from Seymour Hersh that's a little bewildering. I mean, this is one of the best journalists alive who has done more good in the field of journalism than perhaps any other living person. But he put up this story from one unnamed source who couldn't possibly have known directly the entire story, from the rooms in the old executive office building that he got wrong, to, you know, what happened under the water in Europe, to what happened in the US preparing for, you know. And James Bamford, who is also a very, very good journalist, who wrote about this recently in The Nation magazine, he reports, and this is, you know, completely public and verifiable information. This is not, you know, in dispute. He reports on all the motive and capability and likelihood that Ukraine did this, and not with the sailboat where we have to imagine that scuba divers went down and risked their lives, or probably died on the way up, and blew up the pipeline, but with drones. And that in fact, the United States was training the Ukrainians in using these underwater drones up until a day or two before the pipeline was blown up. And in fact, the UK made a gift of a half dozen of these drones capable of this sabotage of this pipeline to Ukraine, and said, go get the Russians, have fun. And James Bamford also documents that even if we imagined the ridiculous possibility that the US wasn't in on this from the get-go, there's no way the US didn't know who did it and what ship went where, because of the sonar equipment they have in the Baltic. They can identify what ship is where at any time. There's no way they don't know who did it. There's no way that Sweden and Poland and Ukraine don't know who did it. And it's almost certain that this was a US/Ukrainian/Polish operation, probably carried out by Ukraine, very likely carried out by drone, and absolutely not carried out by Russia against its own pipeline, for which nobody has a smidgen of circumstantial or otherwise evidence of any sort.
Thanks, David. Okay, last question from Al. Is World Beyond War doing any collaboration with Bill McKibben's Third Act efforts to activate seniors regarding climate change? And for those who don't know, Bill McKibben, the founder of 350.org, has recently founded this new organization, Third Act, which is more, as Al says in the question, to get seniors involved in activism.
Well, I know he's about to do an event in Sacramento and people are going to go to it. He's been a very good educator on climate. He hasn't always been the most strategic activist. He's, saving the climate is pretty high up there, but the Democratic Party is a little bit higher. And he's never been that great on war or been willing to take on the problem of war and war preparation as major contributors to the collapse of the climate. I wish he would, but I think we would be happy. Greta or Al or anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know that we have any immediate plans to do anything with him, but I think we would be happy to, or Kathy or anybody who knows otherwise. I think we would be more than happy to work with him, especially if he'd be willing to acknowledge that war has anything to do with the collapse of the climate.
Yeah. And I know, Al, you've worked with him a little bit in the past with the Florida event, so there could be possibilities for collaboration in Illinois. All right, well, let's move on to the next section of the event, which is going to be facilitated by Rich. And Rich will be leading us in a discussion of the draft statements for the World Beyond War Illinois chapter, talking about who are we and what we envision statement for the chapter. And at this point, Rich will be facilitating it, and we will allow you all and encourage you all to raise your hands and unmute and chime in on this discussion. So throughout this, please use the raise hand feature on Zoom, which you can find in the reactions tab. Just click reactions and then hit raise hand, and I will flag that and we can call on you. So go ahead, Rich.
All right. Thank you very much. Name's Rich Whitney, attorney by profession. I live in Carbondale and I've been active in the peace movement for many decades. Basically, what I want to report on is what this organizing steering committee has been doing over the last couple of months. We've met a number of times, and we came up with this very basic statement of who we are and what we envision as our initial organizing principles for an Illinois chapter. And David, if you could share your screen and put that slide up there so people could refer to it. There we are. Okay. So since we are a group in formation, I want to begin by emphasizing that what we're presenting here is not written in stone. In fact, part of the reason we're doing this evening is to get your feedback on these statements and see if you agree on whether or not we are on the right track. I also want to mention that our steering committee is open. We're still a group in formation. At the end of this event tonight, Al will give you some more information about how you can join, but it's open to everyone in Illinois that wants to be a part of this effort. So as far as what we have in front of us, when your steering committee discussed having some founding principles for our chapter, we ultimately decided to keep it simple and just refer to World Beyond War's core mission of ending war and militarism. So in describing who we are, we decided we did not need to reinvent the wheel and come up with some new set of principles of unity or a chapter constitution or anything of that nature. Instead, we just referenced World Beyond War's Peace Pledge or Declaration of Pledge, which hopefully all of you have already signed. And if you have that handy, David. Da-da. There we go. Simple, straightforward, and to the point. We understand that wars and militarism make us less safe than protect us. They kill, injure, and traumatize adults, children, infants, severely damage the natural environment, erode civil liberties, drain our economies, siphoning resources from life-affirming activities. We're committed to engage in and support nonviolent efforts to end all war and preparations for war and to create a sustainable and just peace. That works for us as principles of unity, you know. We can always debate things, but this gets right to the point. It has it's very focused and gets to the point of what brings us together, both World Beyond War globally and World Beyond War here in Illinois. If we go back to the what we envision statement. There we go. Okay, so if we move down to the what we envision statement, what we basically did is settle on three main focal points of activity, which are all identified in that first sentence there. So offering ongoing peace education, countering the dominant pro-war media narrative, and making efforts to influence our elected officials to stop supporting and financing militarism and war. I just want to say a few words about our motivations in settling on these three areas before going to any questions or comments. The first 2 points are kind of related because a good part of what the peace movement has to struggle with is widespread ignorance, disinformation, and a public that is saturated with pro-war, pro-militarist propaganda 24/7. Peace education has always been a major focus of World Beyond War. It is one of the best and most steadfast organizations doing this work. It has terrific resources to offer. And so it makes sense for us as an Illinois chapter for one of our focuses to be on supporting and extending these efforts in Illinois. As for the role of what I usually refer to as the corporate media, meaning the cable and broadcast news networks, the still influential papers like the New York Times and Washington Post, the corporate online news sources, the Daily Beast, Politico, blah, 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 and the big social media outfits, they're all almost completely under the thumb of the military industrial intelligence agency, national security state complex, and what has recently been called the censorship industrial complex by journalists Matt Taibbi, Michael Schellenberger, and others. If you could bring up this little meme graphic that I sent you earlier, David. Now, take a quick look at this. This graphic is obviously a little bit oversimplified. There are still real journalists out there, but especially if you're talking about the main corporate media at the global and national level, this mainly illustrates what's going on. Instead of news journalists challenging the decisions of those in power, they are echoing and reinforcing the narrative that those in power want people to support in order to justify ongoing militarism and war, among other agendas. In fact, and this is a particular area of interest that I've done a lot of research on, and what is truly alarming is the extent to which people with ties to the military and intelligence agencies are now actually running most of these big media corporations and making the editorial, so-called fact-checking, and censorship decisions. And I've got a lot of resources that I can share on that as we do our chapter work. Now, why is this important? Well, because these corporations are still the main source of news and information for many people. And what are they being told? Russia is our enemy. China is our enemy. The war in Ukraine started in 2022 when Russia invaded and was completely unprovoked by US and NATO, et cetera, et cetera. And it's also about what we're not being told. The fact that our own government has sabotaged a peaceful resolution to the Ukrainian conflict, and that some war planners actually think we can win a nuclear war against Russia. The fact that we still have troops in Syria that are literally stealing that nation's oil right now. The fact that the US has troops and drones in Somalia right now that are propping up a corrupt puppet government and perpetuating the war in that country. And of course, the example of Montenegro that David just brought up earlier. We're not hearing about this stuff. And when was the last time that anyone saw any representative of the peace movement being permitted to express our perspective or even being quoted by any of the major corporate news outlets? The only example of which I'm aware of was Tucker Carlson having a handful of peace movement people and anti-war journalists on for a few minutes over the last few months here and there. And look at what just happened to him, just like what happened to Phil Donahue 20 years ago when he questioned the push for war on Iraq. So making people aware that they are being propagandized by pro-militarist advocates under the pretext of thinking that what they are getting is news, and finding a way to push back against these pro-war narratives is, we think, an important part of what we should be doing. And as for that third part on the what we envision, that is influencing elected officials. Militarism and war have wealthy and powerful forces and a huge pro-war lobby pushing them, but our government still has to vote to fund them, approve the shipments of arms or deployment of troops or drone attacks, etc. And although now we have an imperial presidency, Congress does still have the power to stop acts of war committed by the executive branch. Yet what are we seeing from our so-called representatives in Congress? Very little resistance, sometimes zero resistance, to ever larger military budgets, more billions and billions to Ukraine every couple of months, more provocations of China, more so-called color revolutions that lead to armed conflict being pushed, more money for over 800 military bases or more around the globe, arms sales to just about every country under the sun, and on it goes. So the peace movement and our chapter, we believe, in our opinion, needs to push back in a much more visible and effective way to let our representatives know that this is not acceptable. We need a peace lobby in this country, and to stay true to that purpose, it has to start at the grassroots level. And it's our hope that an Illinois chapter of World Beyond War can play a role in helping that come to pass. So that's a basic summary of the three parts of our What We Envision statement. There's a couple of other sentences there where we hope to grow, obviously, and also ally with other peace groups around the state that are already trying to do some of this work. Obviously, this is good. In fact, we're actually competing with a peace movement meeting in Chicago tonight, but that's good. I mean, it's good that this stuff is going on all over the place. So we hope to network and do this work in collaboration with the other groups in Illinois that are doing this. So with that, I'll stop talking and see if you have any feedback on either the who we are or what we envision statement, positive or negative. And then after that, after we have a few moments to do that, we're actually going to break into 3 breakout groups that will focus on each of these 3 areas. If you choose one tonight, it doesn't mean you can't participate in the others later on. This is just to help doing some brainstorming to help us get started on our work in Illinois.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rich. David, maybe you could just pull that statement up on the screen again while we have a little bit of a discussion. And again, folks, feel free to use the raise hand feature and I can call on you. Or if you prefer, you can also put your comments and questions in the chat and I can read those out.
Well, by silence, should I assume assent and approval, or and you can also, if you have ideas of things that you think are left out, I mean, that's fair as well. But we did want to keep it simple and pretty narrowly focused, and we thought these three areas made sense as something, at least as we get started. Obviously, if we grow, we can expand, maybe consider doing other projects. Looks like Al, did you have a question? Yeah, you're muted though.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to find the raise hand thing. I couldn't find it. I want to stress thank you, Rich, for I thought a very great explanation or what on this these two statements. I want to emphasize that the last sentence there about allying with other Illinois groups, because there are, fortunately, Illinois groups, as Rich mentioned, the Chicago Area Peace Action Group is meeting right now. Code Pink is active in Illinois, and those are organizations that are very active, and as we need to have activists, in the streets, pressing and pushing. And so our effort would be to ally with them, maybe not to compete against, but we hope to amplify their efforts and ally with them in the work they're doing. And ours might be a little different, as Rich mentioned, on education and the media and lobbying governmental decision makers. So.
I would point out that there's a thumbs up function in the reactions menu on Zoom as well. So if you like what you've heard and if you like our statement, you can do a thumbs up for us too, and that'll let us know that we're at least starting on the right track.
I see the thumbs ups are coming in.
I also just noticed there's apparently no thumbs down reaction there. So,
Yeah, we have a peace vigil in speaking of local groups. I'm with the Peace Coalition of Southern Illinois, and we have a peace vigil the first Saturday of each month, where we're just out in the town square where there's a lot of traffic going by on Highway 13 and so on. And we tend to count the favorable honks and peace signs and thumbs up versus the very few that give us the middle finger or, do something else showing disapproval. And the last one we did, which was on the theme of, there was some sort of national campaign about cutting military spending. And we made it about that. And I'd say it was about a 30-to-1 ratio of favorable to unfavorable reactions from motorists going by, which is a little higher than we've seen before. So, this is another example of where most of the public, I think, is already there, at least to the extent that they think about this issue. And so it's a matter of trying to find ways of capturing that in a way that's going to be more effective in achieving political results.
Oh yeah, Julie, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry I don't have my camera on because I started losing my connection, but that's one of the reasons why I like wearing the World Beyond War t-shirts, because I do get thank yous for wearing it. And the one day I got the most thank yous was on July the 4th, when people were getting the people who said thank you to me must have not liked all the militarism. It was the one where it says my country that's the reason why I can say my, because it's my government, is out going off with all these wars, and all I get is this over-militarized police state, was how I was feeling on July 4th. And I think the people that said thank you liked having the other opinion. That's it.
Great, thanks, Julie. Yeah, we have a lot of t-shirt options at WorldBeyondWar.org/shop. And we can also do custom designs. We've had a few chapters that have worked with us on custom designs. Well, with that, Rich, why don't you've mentioned it already, but do you want to introduce the breakout rooms and we can flow into that?
Yeah, so for this evening, you will want to choose one of the three to participate in. And again, those would be on doing the ongoing peace education, countering the pro-war media narrative, and making efforts to influence elected officials. And so the basic idea, we'll break up into smaller groups for a free-flowing discussion, brainstorming session. What are your thoughts? Well, we'll take a few minutes to introduce ourselves to each other, and then gather your thoughts about what are some things that interest you in this particular area, and what are some things concretely that we can do. And then what we'll do is, toward the end of the breakout session, start putting these in kind of a summary form. And then we're going to come back as a main group and then share what each group has come up with. So that's the basic idea and the basic format.
Awesome. Yeah, so the three topics: education, media, lobbying. I'll set the timer for 25 minutes, and I will now allow everyone to unmute themselves. Okay, so people will be able to unmute themselves during the breakout rooms, and each breakout room will have at least 1 or 2 steering committee members to help facilitate the discussion. So I'm now going to open the rooms, and you should see those options on your screen, and you can choose those. If you're having any issues, feel free to just unmute and let me know. I can put you in the room that you want. Start the recording so we can record these report backs. And I will call on the education breakout room to please share with us very briefly some of the highlights from your discussion.
I'll try to do that and ask the others to chime in if I make mistakes. I want to tell the whole group that Chuck Lederman has already come up with the T-shirt and logo design for the education task force or subcommittee. So we'll be selling those T-shirts here soon to raise funds for educational efforts. And I think the thing that came out was that there's a need for education on a wide variety of topics. There were topics raised about the jobs that are created from militarism and the threat to jobs if we're not making war. How do we make jobs if we're not making war? There's a lot of discussion about the efforts of I'm looking at Madonna and I'm looking at Douglas. The Pax Christi and Pace Bene efforts and the nonviolent communities efforts. There's room for opportunity, or there's educational opportunities there. There are, and we talked about the fact that World Beyond War has a huge amount of resources available. There was a suggestion, and we like this, that we look at the Illinois peacemakers who are already in the state. And provide opportunities for them to have audiences around the state through educational kinds of things. So that's something we could do. And then there was a concern expressed about the fact that we need more diversity. The comment, I think it was Douglas's comment that this group is a little too white, and so we need ethnic, racial, and generational diversity in this group. And so that's, I think, a point well taken. And
Thank you,
anybody
Al.
else? Okay.
Any other comments from the education group? No? Okay, let's hear from the media group.
Okay, it looked like Chuck was saying something, but he was muted. I don't know if, or was that was my mistake? I don't know.
Yeah, I was just wanting to support Al. I mean, I don't think it's easy to kind of summarize a discussion. I just wanted to affirm that I think that was a reasonable summary. Thank you for embarrassing me right away, too. I appreciate that. Mhm.
All right. As far as the media group is concerned, we kind of talked about a lot of ideas. Prior to the meeting, Greta had shared with us some good resources that World Beyond War already has with respect to media, including guides to publishing letters to the editor and op-eds, and some media training resources for being more effective at our own media outreach. And that's an important component. You know, despite the critique of the corporate media that I laid out earlier, we recognize that to some extent, local media can be a lot different, and local media can sometimes be more responsive. So it's important not to forget that, and to include that is an important component of what we do. So that's one thing. Another thing was Kathy Kelly had to bow out, but before she left, she mentioned the idea of creating our own media events, and, you know, in a concerted way. And one thing that she mentioned coming up, which I hadn't heard about before, is there's some sort of Merchants of Death tribunal that's coming up this November. And so we need to get more information about the where and the when and the details, but it is possible to fashion some and create some media events around that. For example, serving subpoenas at the headquarters of some of the big military contractors to, you know, to testify at the Merchants of Death tribunal, which or something like that. A little bit of theater, in other words, but it could attract some media attention. A couple other things, frankly, are things that I've already been working on, but I'd be willing to contribute to this effort. And that is, I mentioned earlier about this phenomenon of military and intelligence people literally directing the media. And I've gathered a lot of sources on that. And so one of the things is my personal project, but I'm willing to contribute to this group with, is to maybe synthesize that into one article, you know, laying out all of this and letting people know, look, this is how serious this is. It's no longer the military industrial complex, it's the military industrial intelligence agency media complex. They're part of it to a large extent. And so people need to be aware of that. And then kind of along the same lines, at the same time as we're exposing what the corporate media is doing, we also want to promote the alternative media. There is a very active, there are many alternative media outlets, real journalists on Substack, on Rumble, Consortium News, Black Alliance for Peace, you know, and maybe compile a list of places. Hey, this is where you can really find out what's really going on, and get a balanced perspective on militarism and war by going to these sites. And that's something else that I'd be willing to work on. Another thing that was mentioned earlier, and that also Greta mentioned, is the idea of, you know, billboards are media. And if we can grow the organization enough to start maybe spending some money on a few carefully well-placed billboards, possibly even calling out our representatives in Congress to tie into what the third group is doing, you know, this is something else that we definitely ought to put on our plate. And then I think the final thing, this is more aspirational, not something we can do maybe right away, but I got to think, given that the corporate media is part of the complex, maybe at some point calling for a national day of action against the corporate media for being warmongers. and instead of protesting outside the headquarters of General Dynamics, have a day where you're protesting outside the headquarters of MSNBC or NPR or whatever your local target is that you want to choose. So just some thoughts for something a little more aspirational. Those were the main things that I think we came up with. But if anybody thinks I forgot something or want to mention anything else, please do.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Let's hear from lobbying, and we are at the 1.5 hour mark, so we hope folks can stay on just for 5 more minutes or so we can wrap up. So lobbying, please go ahead.
I guess I'll jump in. I'm on the steering committee, but I'm fairly new to World Beyond War and peace activism. And so I asked a lot of questions. That's what I do personally. And as a group facilitator, educator, I'm the queen of questions. So what I got out of our wonderful, short, but informative discussion is, what is lobbying? It is all the different ways that you can connect with your policymakers and communicate with them. And then Karen was great about helping to clarify that the more you are discussing and talking about some resolution or some upcoming law that is in the works, that is the best way to be effective. And yet you can have some kind of discussion about the whole idea of let's cut the military budget. Can we not do that? So then the challenge may be, because we're so scattered, how would we do that? We all, and it's also best to connect with your own, congressional person. And yet there's, national issues you can be more of a group on. So I think it's something that we, said needs to be explored with the larger group, and to talk about that and how might we do that. We might go off to our individual connections with something that we all decide on, but that can be a challenge, and yet it's potentially pretty exciting to be hopefully impacting those who might be making some of these decisions. Karen, Jennifer, anything more? No.
Yeah, and we did. Yeah, that there's just a lot to explore, and I think that's Lois kind of meandered through the different things that we talked about, and just be in the context of World Beyond War. Sometimes they'll send out an email with some possibilities that we might consider advocating for, and also just having a conversation with maybe more people on advocacy as we grow the chapter, or communicate with some of the other people who registered for this call but weren't able to make it for one reason or another and might listen to the recording, that we see what it is that we want to advocate for. So it's really up to us. Whatever we choose is important. And even if it's a small group about lobbying in particular, that we would then bring that out to the whole chapter, and maybe even Greta would communicate with the larger Illinois database or something when we're ready to do an action and see who wants to participate.
Wonderful. Well, that all sounds exciting to me. And yeah, I'm happy to help with things like emailing things out to our list and publicizing and all of that. So yeah, let's go to the final closing words from Al to please wrap us up. So go ahead, Al.
This will be very brief, I hope. Our next steering committee meeting is, yes, it's coming up in 2. Why did I lose that now? May 25th. We meet the 2nd and 4th Thursdays of the month at 6:30 p.m. And we do that by Zoom. We'd love to have anybody join us. So I don't know if it would be appropriate, if you're interested in joining the steering committee, perhaps you could put a thumbs up or raise your hand now. I put my email in the chat that you could contact me, or I don't know how to do it. That might be easy, the easiest way to do that. But we'd love to have you at the next meeting. And thank you all for being here tonight and for your devotion to peace.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, we'll send out an email with the recording and any next steps. And certainly, Al, we can include your email address in the next date of the steering committee meeting. We can include all that in the follow-up email.
Oh, Jennifer has a question? Or, oh. Okay.
No, it was just, thank you. A pause.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Okay.
All right, wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Greta, for helping us with this.
Yes, Greta, thank you. David,
Greta.
too.
No problem.
Yes.
Nice to see you all.
Thanks, Greta.
All right.
Great seeing you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.